Hello, everyone. I want to talk about the book From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. This is a gem of a book. It's easy to read. It's fast-paced. It's right to the point. It's written by Monsignor James Shea, University of Mary. They got together as, it looks like if you read the introduction, a group of leaders, and they had these discussions, and out of these discussions, then this book was written. There's a companion book written to this as well that you can check out. But I want to take you through this book because it's important for us to understand that we live in paradigm-changing days, and this particular book is echoing and confirming that the strategies that are used in Christianity in the past are not the strategies that we need to be using in the days in which we live. So this is a book that confirms and affirms what certainly we've been talking about for these last 50 years. So let's take a look at this book. If you look at this book on a page outline I've got it into 5 different sections. The introduction area here, and then everyone has a ruling imaginative vision as part 2. Part 3, talking about the differences between Christendom mode and an apostolic mode. 4 is strategies for an apostolic days. And I'm putting some of our own logos and some of our own images in these to help me remember, to help others remember, to tie it back to our stewardship and certainly to the set of patterns that we are pursuing in these days. And then the 5th section here is about seeing the world differently, about making commitments to live in these apostolic days and what to do instead. So with that introduction, let's get right to it. They start off in this first part by saying the last couple of generations, things are been changing rapidly. We live in a change for the ages, and our duty now is very urgent. Every generation changes some, but every once in a while you have a change for the ages. This matches Hans Kuhn's argument that every 300 to 500 years there's a paradigm shift in Christendom and Christianity, and we've lived in about 5 since the time of Christ. So they're arguing those are the days in which we live, paradigm shifting or change for the ages days. Technology is changing our culture faster than ever before. Pope Francis was quoted as saying, Christendom no longer exists. That is, the effects of Christianity or Christendom on our culture are no longer there. People don't think with the first principles of Christianity. They may not go to church. They may not be attending or participating in any church in any sort of way, but they would actually still live with Christian principles, that is a Christendom culture, but that culture no longer exists. So they're saying today the church's influence on society is ineffective, and this calls for paying attention to our strategies to make sure we are not using old strategies of yesterday to fight today's world in which we live. And overall, it's saying that our societies around the world are ridding themselves of Christian basis and Christian thinking. Then it goes on to talk about everyone has what they call a ruling imaginative vision. This is a mindset, a way of thinking, a constellation of patterns in which a person thinks unconsciously, but it is there. They call it a ruling imaginative vision. This is very much like what David Bosch talks about, or Hans Kuhn's picks up as well. But Joel Barker, when he says paradigms, a set of paradigms is a constellation of ideas that people hold on to. And so they talk about how everyone's mind is shaped by a combination of these things over here in the blue: the religion, their philosophical currents, the traditions of the current generation, their social, political, linguistic, geographic, and artistic influences in the day, all shape how a person views the world. It rules their imaginative vision. And it says, they say that these provide an overall view that the individual and society are given to make decisions in how to live and to hold together in a world with a compelling narrative to continue on. These are the ruling imaginative vision first principles that are hidden away in our mind, often not discussed, but they're acted upon daily. So that's very much a paradigm, very much a ruling imaginative vision. It talks a little bit about how the aim of Western education has been to free the mind from unexamined assumptions. So these assumptions, these ruling imaginative visions, we have to examine them. And it says that this is why we have introduced in our world today the liberal arts. Mortimer Adler was big in the early 1920s, 1930s about the liberal arts and the importance of those so we can liberate the person, liberate the mind. But the collapse of education means that we are frequently dealing with individuals and groups of people who are highly educated, but yet are conspicuously unaware of their own ruling imaginative vision and the assumptions that they bring along with it. It also talks about how technology has altered the way people live, cajoling them with different gospels. We have so many different gospels that inundate us today. Schemes of salvation and routes to happiness wrapped in attractive but deceptive clothing, they say. Very compelling arguments that they're making in this chapter that spell out the problem, the mindset that humans are living with in our day. Academic institutions are decayed, and not much wisdom or light is hoped for. They tend to deform rather than to enlighten the mind. This is the ruling imaginative vision that everyone carries, and that we have to understand that we are fighting against in a way. Then in the third part here, they talk about a Christendom mode versus an apostolic mode. Now, I added these pictures to help signify and to help remember what the arguments are. But this Christendom mode, let's start with this on the left side. They say they're working in a world when Christian values are present, and this is the last couple hundred years in the West. Christendom people know what is supposed to happen in church. People know what the Christian values are, the values of life and human dignity. And they're unconscious for a lot of people, this ruling imaginative vision. But the strategies of Christians and the strategies of the church work in this Christendom days because everybody's living with that ruling imaginative vision in their mind. And so primarily the strategies in those days are for maintenance. First-class Christians will seek roles inside of the church. Second-class Christians will develop institutions that are Christian and have Christendom values. Humans will be prone in these days to idolize the visible and forget the invisible. Christians in the Christendom mode tend to be apathetic and they tend to be lukewarm in their faith. These are Christians who show up for Christmas, show up for Easter services, show up, sit in a pew, show up and look and sit forward, but don't do much more than that. They're apathetic and lukewarm in these days. Church leaders are not engaged. The leaders of the church are not engaged in a high-stakes spiritual struggle. Instead, they see themselves primarily as managers, administrators of religious events that typically happen on a Sunday morning. Worship services, singing, prayer, and preaching from the front, a monologue. 7, Christians will lean towards hypocrisy to maintain their positions in these days. What these authors are saying is the Christendom mode is over. It's dead, quoting Pope Francis there in their introduction. And what they're calling for and a recognition of is that we live in days that actually look more like Acts. And this is what calls for then an apostolic mode, meaning we need to function more like what is seen in the New Testament. And this is confronting a world with a very different vision than its own ruling imaginative vision. This mode resembles the early church age, calling for intentional apostolic-like strategies, and here's 6 that they list out. Life is more challenging for Christians in these apostolic days. 2, it's necessary for leaders to have greater purity, paradigm purity, if you will, because the stakes are very high. True leaders will not pursue church leadership in these days and church offices because the stability of money nor the prestige is what they're actually looking for. 4, errors in all forms, both doctrinal and moral, are really rife, are really high in these days as new patterns are emerging. Raising children in these apostolic days is, and even in Christendom days, is always a struggle. But in these days, it's extremely difficult. In fact, it's actually a missionary enterprise. And 6, Christians in these days will lean towards cowardice and will go back to Christendom modes, much like we might be able to compare what the apostles are talking about. Don't go back in the Petrine Circle letters, for example. Don't go back to the Judaizers, the Judaistic system. Stick with the apostles and their teachings, that is of Christ. And in these days, a very similar people will, instead of being in the apostolic mode and apostolic methods of the early church, they'll go back to a Sunday morning event. So, 4, what are some strategies that they list out for their apostolic days? I have put in here patterned after Acts, a logo we use for many of our things and a lingo that we use to summarize. We need to get back to the early church and its set of patterns for our day. Let me zoom in a little bit here. It lists out, 7 or 8 of them? Let me go through them for you. In these days, we need to get an apostolic attitude. It only took a few leaders in those days, no priests, no theologians, very few believers, no buildings, no money, with an ignorant and hostile culture towards them. So we need to get an apostolic attitude. Don't be trapped by social analysis. The logic of surveys, sociological and numerical extrapolations are not helpful in these days, as the movement of the Spirit is unmeasurable. A lot of things of funding that goes towards projects and measuring of projects, and measuring is not bad on its face, but don't be trapped by it and don't think that success is in the numerical outcomes. Use institutions differently. Don't use them for religious gatherings. Instead, use them for strengthening the core family aspects of the society. Everyone finds meaning and purpose through a community of people, and the family is at that core of society. Strengthen practices that the incarnate transcendent, that is, that you cannot see, becomes visible. Make the invisible visible in our patterns. Now, we can't control every aspect of that, but this is a war not against flesh and blood. We've got to get serious and believe that is what we as leaders are doing with these patterns. Rethink priestly life and education, that is the leadership of churches. Train leaders that align with the Apostolic Age, not with the Christendom modes. Good-hearted, sincere leaders are not enough. They will be eaten alive in an Apostolic Age. Instead, train strong, laser-focused, lion-type leaders. Very clear here. When they sent Paul and Barnabas out in Acts 13, they didn't send just volunteers or people who wanted to be missionaries out into the world. They sent their very best. And what did those very best people and leaders and strong leaders do? Did they go dig wells? Did they go do social outreach things? Certainly the churches, as they strengthened, did those matters. But the leaders went out and they built God's kingdom by planting more churches and by strengthening the leaders setting up leaders in those churches, forming them into networks of churches. We need to allocate resources with apostolicity in mind, invest and fight strategically for important apostolic work, not precisely calculated budgets. They talk about how so much of our success and so much is measured in our churches of if we reach our budget. That is just not how Paul and the early apostles, Peter and John, thought. That was not their ruling imaginative vision. In these days, there are a relatively small number who are given the grace of an intense spiritual life and a calling for the entire church. So allocate resources towards apostolicity, towards apostolic work that is around the world. One of our leaders, it reminds me of Keith was his name, and a paragraph of his last public words before he died was, find the apostolic leaders in the team in your area and tie yourself to them, and your life will be fruitful. Not successful, but it will be meaningful and purpose-filled. And that's what these authors are saying as well. Be ready for apostolic messiness. Apathetic bodies in Christendom are easy to arrange. In the Christendom mode, apathetic people coming in for Christmas and for Easter services, or just apathetically coming in because they feel like they have to do a religious thing on Sunday morning in order to be saved, or that's what Jesus has told them to do in order to be a Christian. That's what you do, is you show up. They're easy to arrange, but not so in the apostolic days. Zealous apostolic type leaders will take to the battle. Everything is a serious undertaking. Welcome apostolic energy, even when this means much risks. There is much to be gained in these days, the apostolic days. Expect cultural influence to be exercised through impressive witness. The Spirit is alive in these days, and the Ephesians 3:14-21 prayer I've added there, a prayer that we've been praying for many, many years. So let's look at the fifth portion here. They say, so we need to see the world differently, and we need to make commitments to reshape our mind and build a different ruling imaginative vision, what Peter calls a complex state of mind. Peter's talking about the same thing in the last chapter of his first book. Paul talks about it in the first part of the Didache portion of Romans, that is Romans 12-16, Romans 12:1-2 specifically, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So this is the same thing. We have to build a framework, an architecture in our minds, that's the human part of this, around an apostolic days in which we live. So they talk about the Christendom mode here first, and then we talk about an instead here. So let's look at it. Christendom mode, the teaching and preaching, they assume, that strategy assumes a Christian narrative lives in people's minds. This is not effective in apostolic days. People already have a barrage of false gospels that are ruling their mind, and that come in with gospel confusion. As a society, we're inundated with the sensual. We are all anxious people, and we do not know the way forward. So this ties into how we need to be indistractable. This talks about technology and its ever cyclical nature of always going back for another little bit that satisfies a short-term need, a 5-second need. In Christendom mode, existing church leaders do not believe in Christendom mode. They don't believe that the world is undergoing transformation, and they've lost their youthful idea of dreaming and instead have substituted a comfortable personal life of religious services. And so again, they're calling about, in Christendom mode, these things are not what's useful in apostolic days. They're sounding the alarm. Do not continue in the Christendom mode. In our apostolic age, instead, we need these three areas. And I've certainly tailored them to our own stewardship using their arguments from before. Embrace returning back to the patterns of the way of Christ and his apostles. Make a lifetime commitment to join the battle against spiritual forces of this world, and do not return to the traditions of Christendom. And epic dramas and cosmic battles in these apostolic days demand strong leaders. So let me pull myself back up to the top here, and let's zoom back out so we can see this whole book. I highly recommend you You can listen to this book. You can read this book. My job here is to whet your appetite, give you a quick overview of its core aspects that I believe are very useful for us in stewarding the way of Christ and his apostles, of getting back to those patterns that the first apostles, who wrote 27 letters in order to establish people, the people who got the letters, the churches, the individuals, the clusters and networks of churches, they already believed in the gospel by the time they had these letters. These 27 letters of the New Testament, the New Covenant, were to strengthen and establish them in the faith and teach them how to have this ruling imaginative vision, to how to have the mind of Christ. So use this book as a tool in order to wake us up on what Christ is doing in today's world. Let's all live in an apostolic mode in these days. Bye-bye.